tell you a bit more about AQMEN and more about this project more generally. We see today as rather informal, although on a very serious and important topic, rather informal, so feel free to kind of contribute or to ask questions or to interact as you feel will be most appropriate as the sessions go, and we very much welcome that. Just the sort of usual kind of housekeeping things, we're not expecting a fire drill today, so if the fire alarm did sound, we would all leave hopefully together as quickly as possible. The fire exits are marked in green, and we would take a list once we were at an assembly point. And I had the very, very unusual experience just before Christmas of going to the Panto in Perth. The new Perth Theatre opened. It was the first day of the theatre. It'd been closed for 3 years. It was the opening pantomime, and I was there with my niece and nephew who seemed to be enjoying themselves. And Aladdin came out, and the first flash from Aladdin's lamp set off the fire alarms, but actually set them off in a way that the whole theatre had to evacuate, and the fire brigade, two tenders came. But it's quite interesting because you're standing outside on a very cold Scottish day, and the Dame was there, and Aladdin was standing next to you. And but the nice thing about it was they managed to restart very well, and the fire crew came in and sort of carried Aladdin and the genie and so on onto the city. So but I can't promise any similar sort of interesting drama today. So without much ado, I'm gonna get on. So we've made contact with you, we've invited you, some of you we've met previously at the Big Data London event. We are AQMEN. It was formerly the Applied Quantitative Methods Network, where that terminology came from, but we're sort of more broadly involved in data science type activities for social research now. We're funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, which is funded in itself by BEIS, the government department. The ESRC, we have one representative from the ESRC who we'll hear from later. I think they would describe themselves as an arm's length government department. Really, their focus is funding research in universities, but also in some other organisations. And we're based at the University of Edinburgh. And this is a pilot project where we're reaching out towards industry, so reaching out towards organisations outside of the university, looking at the possibilities for training and development in terms of big data analytics and big social science data, which I'll explain some more about shortly. So the new industrial strategy, and I suspect that very few people in the room, with the exception probably of John, have read all of the strategy. I've read about 2/3 of it. It's a very large government document, but most people here will have either heard about it on the radio or TV or read about it in the newspapers. And the new industrial strategy really offers the opportunity to rethink the breadth of what social science has of value to business and industries, organisations outside of the universities. And when we talk about social science today, we're really talking about the broad range of social science areas, most notably sort of economics and sociology and politics, but also psychology and human geography, anthropology, communication studies, cultural studies, and so on. So that's what we mean by the term social science. And we know that people outside of universities infrequently kind of use the word social science, but we mean the sort of knowledge and skills and methods within all of these social science disciplines. A key message that's coming out of well, this work and other work is that across many industry sectors, there's a need for better trained individuals that have skills to work effectively with data. So that's a sort of key message that's really coming from a broad range of organisations in very different sectors. And part of the thinking today is really to try and drill downwards to kind of how we might respond to that message. So the function of today, the structure of today, is that we're going to have a series of talks and then lots and lots of discussion, as much as you feel you can engage in, really about the data and the training requirements in your own organisations. So we're really interested in finding out your views on what's required in the short and medium and ultimately the long term in terms of training people and your organisation's training needs and your individual's training requirements. So, I'll just get a wee drink of water. I'm really going to now start to frame some of the themes that we may be traversing throughout the rest of the day. And I'm going to talk a little bit about big social science and the new industrial revolution. So, the world of data, well, data's all around us, and I would say that data are central to the unfolding industrial revolution. So very much like we might see steam or the printing press or electronics as being key to earlier industrial revolutions, data are now key to the industrial revolution which we're kind of passing through at the current time. And particularly new forms of data that are digitally native, by which I mean data that have been born in the digital format rather than being transferred to a digital format. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that subsequently. And to get us kind of thinking about novel uses of data, I thought I would come up with a kind of as far out a novel example as is possible. And I was talking to my dad last week. That's my dad in 1960, when he was in the Air Force. Is one of a very small number of West Indian servicemen in the Royal Air Force at that time. And he was in a fighter control unit. And I was talking to him about novel uses of data when I phoned him up last week. And he said, sort of give me an example of something that, what would be a sort of example? I thought, I'll work on a really good example for him. So I said, well, Dad, what I'm going to do is I'm going to commission some aerial photography. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to analyse the photographs, and I'm going to home in on houses that have either got trampolines or paddling pools in their garden. And this is my way of working out which areas have the greatest density of small children in the household. Yeah? And this is sort of information you couldn't readily get from another source. Yeah? So it's kind of unique in this sort of way. So it'd be very contemporaneous information about locating households, geographical location of households with small children in them. And I said, well then, Dad, what I would do is I'd get onto the Met Office and I'd get Met data and I would try and predict long, stable spells of particularly hot, sunny weather. And then the next thing I would do is I would commission an airship. And I'd park my airship, it's quite easy to park an airship, I'd park it above those areas, on those hot days, those areas with the most children, where all the kind of paddling pools are and so on. And then I said, Dad, the next thing I would do is I would draw on your vectoring skills. So I'd be able to vector in my ice cream van, right? My ice cream van for my ice cream business. It's not a university startup, it's just a side hustle for me then. And I said that, Dad, because of the popularity of Thunderbirds, I would get my ice cream van. I'll build an ice cream van that looks like Fab One. Do you remember from Thunderbirds? And I said, and also I would spend some time getting into character as Parker, the driver turned ice cream man. And then the final thing I would do is locate this neighbourhood and go and sell ice cream there. But that's not the end of it. What I'd also do is write an app. And I'd say to any parents, if you download the app, you get your ice cream for half price. But the great thing about the app is the app's got a back door. And every so often, once I've got this hot spell of weather again, what I do is I flash to the people who have got an app, and I say, you can win free ice cream. You can win free ice cream, just tell me some stuff. And they tell me some stuff, but out the back door I also find their GPS location. So the next time I don't have to go through all the rigmarole with the airship because they're telling me where they are and I'm going straight to them to sell ice cream. Okay. I've got a kind of happy, well-paid job, so if anyone else wants to take this forward, I'm more than happy to be scooped. That's an ice cream joke and a data joke. And obviously that example is completely ridiculous, but it gives us some views of thinking about different ways of thinking about data. Now for me, big data is really characterised by three things. Largely it's volume, its velocity and its variety. So particularly, I would always say, well, big data has to be big. If it's small, it can't be big data. And nowadays, we're used to data sets being incredibly large. A couple of days ago, I think Friday, I was looking at a data set of share prices, and it was minute by minute. So it's minute by minute for the whole trading day. So of course, it was 60 minutes in every hour, 8 hours of trading. But then you could zoom in on greater resolution, and you could get second by second information. So you suddenly got 60 times 60 times 8 hours. So we're now getting into the area, the realm where we actually get bigger and bigger data sets. The speed of data, well, we're used to data being kind of delivered to us for analysis, but now it kind of appears with us sometimes, and it can even be real time, whether it be from GPS or from sensors or from remote sensors even. And one of the examples I saw very, very recently is a guy had a great data set, which was, he had eye tracking for the individual. So the data collection was mounted on a pair of glasses that the individual were using, but it was actually millisecond by millisecond information. And you can imagine it doesn't take very long, to collect data at the millisecond level for you to really have a massive data set. So if you think about, if you thought about your day, how much you looked around, if this was sliced up millisecond by millisecond, you would have millions of observations in just one day of data collection. So volume and speed, and obviously variety. So now we get, it's really kind of, data is all around us. At any stage, there are millions and millions of Google's petabytes, terabytes, whatever scale you want to look at it, of data being generated and either being harvested or not being harvested, which could be very useful for us for all kinds of analysis about the social world, about economic life, about social and economic life that could be usefully used. I think it's important to make the distinction, and Tim Harford, who some of you, the economist, as some of you will know from Radio 4, from more or less the Undercover Economist, he makes a sharp distinction between made data and found data. By which you mean made data is data that are made for social science research. So classically the sort of things like surveys, you're setting out from the offset to collect some social science data. So it's not like the surveys or the censuses. In Britain we have lots of data. We've had a long tradition, very, very successful tradition. So we've got some big household panel studies where we go back to the same households every year and interview the same household individuals in the household. We've got some very long running birth cohort studies where the children have been born and we've tracked them over a number of years, interviewing them at different times. We've got hundreds of thousands of experiments where data are collected specifically for a social science purpose. So this is made data, it's made for social science analysis, but we're really moving into the era of found data, where data are around us and can be found and can be marshalled, harvested in some way to be used for social research. And most obviously, there are the sort of millions of posts or tweets or blog posts or Twitter tweets that are kind of generated second by second in the world. They're telling us something about the conditions of the contemporary world, and we may be able to use those quite productively. Equally, there's lots of transaction data, so there's millions of pieces of data on for example, on retail, on online shopping, but lots and lots of information from other areas such as store cards, and lots of information from our service providers. So, who sells you broadband, who sells you water, gas, and so on. They also have information about those transactions that we make. And then finally, there's lots of official data about things that are known to us because of kind of the society we live in. So, if you're older, do you remember seeing these at the doctor's? These are called Lloyd George notes. That used to get the doctor, and she used to write on these sort of brown notebooks. So those are gone now. So this is an example. That data wasn't digitally native. You go to the doctor's now, the doctor just types straight in. The information is digital. I asked my doctor to show me some stuff because we had a bit of time in an appointment a few years ago. I had my appendix out when I was 6. It's in a Lloyd George note. It's now been scanned, so it's on my medical record, but it's a scan, so it's not searchable. Unlike the information that the doctor collects now, which is searchable in the database. So there is an electronic record of me having my appendix out. It's just one you can't get to very easily. We have lots of dental records, benefits, pensions, driving licenses, tax. Someone's been at the passport office this morning, I heard. So passport information. And if you're younger, you may even have your educational records digitally. If you're older, you probably won't have. Can these things be usefully used? Well, yes, they can sometimes and up to a point, I think would be the summary. So there are very strict rules governing the access of administrative data because of privacy and ethics. So it is strictly governed, and for good reason. So as a company, you may not have particularly easy access to administrative data. We have had some problems in Britain with data loss and data distrust, and certainly, I was trying to get a more polite word than fiasco, but I can't think of one. I think fiasco is right, of the care.dat data, so that's why there have been some concerns, genuine concerns quite rightly, around the use of administrative data. In the UK, it's incredibly hard to link people, so these sorts of things, if you have a look at your driving licence, you've got a different number to your passport, which is a different number to your examination number if you've got one. Certainly a different number to your NHS number, it's a very different number to your national insurance number. So there's nothing that uniquely identifies people in Britain, unlike the Nordic countries that tend to have ID numbers and a national register. So there are some problems of actually combining information. When this is done in Britain, the Economic and Social Research Council have made big investments to help social science researchers use administrative data, and it's been relatively successful over the last 4 or 5 years. But whenever researchers are using these data, the data are anonymised and individuals can never be identified, and information about those individuals can never therefore be disclosed. So it is an incredibly secure system. But there is this data, but I think it would be reasonable to say it would be very difficult for a commercial organisation. It would be certainly a protracted process to try and get access to these data. But I'm not saying it will never happen, it just may not happen immediately. And I think the way to think about all these new forms of data, these forms of found data, is to think of them as exhaust data. So they're the exhaust of some other process, whether that be a transaction or whether that be an administrative process or a service. They're the stuff that kind of comes out the other end. It's not made for social science research, but you could usefully use it, you could approach it, and it may be of some benefit to you. And I think really, if we were back here in 10 years' time, I would imagine, I would wager at least, that we will have much more social science research in Britain that is a combination of made and found data. There's probably going to be a sweet spot in which we start to use much more made data in conjunction with found data, and that's my sort of prophecy for the next decade, as it were. One of the things I always like to ask myself is, if English-speaking Martians came down, what sort of questions would they ask us? And if English-speaking Martians came down, they might say, well, why do you need social scientists for any of this? Why do you need people who've been to university and studied social science? Why don't we just have clever machines? Why don't we use computer scientists? They're normally quite smart folks. Why don't we use physicists? They're good at computation. Why don't we choose some of these people? And I think there are some good reasons. I think machines are not up to it, and if you'd have come 40 minutes before, we seem to have problems just projecting. So, I sometimes wonder about kind of how far we've actually got with technology. Computer scientists know a lot about computing. They probably don't know so much about social science, and the same with physicists. And the sort of answer I would probably give the English-speaking Martians is that social scientists bring a knowledge of how people behave, which you might call like theory with a small t, if you like. So we know a lot about how people behave, how they've behaved in the past, how they might behave in the future. And the thing I'm always saying to students is that stupid stuff that people do is not necessarily the same as stupid people do. I'll read that again. Stupid stuff that people do is not necessarily the same as stuff stupid people do. Yeah, we all behave irrationally. I think if you watch what's the money program with Martin Lewis, here is a man who stands up almost weekly telling us how to save money, but we don't go and do it. Yeah, we don't always behave rationally, we don't always behave as rationally as maybe we would do if we were behaving optimally in an economic sense. We all have our own preferences, our own desires, things we prefer not to do, and so on. And you know, one of the things about social science is we're used to working with kind of not just with awkward and difficult people, but with whole groups of people who have different preferences, ideas, desires, and so on. So it really is important to understand how people go about the social world, how they interact, what their choices are, what their desires, their decisions, and so on. I think also data provenance and data quality. In the social sciences, we spent a lot of time thinking about the validity of measures and the reliability of measures. And here's an example. I went to a fantastic talk on the face of it a few years ago, where someone was positing the idea that if you use store card information, so even as you speak, there's somebody in the queue in one of the stores, and they've got their basket of shopping, and they've got their shopping trolley, and the whole sort of stuff gets scanned item by item, and that goes into a database against their store cards. But every item, from like a tin of beans to a loaf of bread that's been scanned, has got nutritional information associated with it. So wouldn't it be a good idea, because we know what people are buying, we can find out about nutrition, and this could take us really quite a long way. Well, on the face of it, that sounds like a really neat idea. You think, yeah, you maybe could get something out of that. But then, when you really think about it, most British households throw away a lot of food. We try not to, but it's actually staggering when people study how much food is thrown away. But we all tend to throw away a bit of food, at least. In our case, my wife's a vegetarian. I eat both the steaks in the tin pack, not always on the same night, right? But I will tend to eat both the steaks. Who knows? You're buying all this stuff. Is it for a dinner party? Have you got other people over? Are you cooking for a neighbour? Who knows? We can't necessarily assume that all the stuff in your basket is kind of going down people's necks. Sometimes you forget your store card. You still go and buy shopping. You forget your store card. You might think of this technically as some sort of item non-response, if you like. I mislaid my card a couple of years ago. I haven't found it and I haven't replaced it. So all the times I go shopping, it doesn't go on a card. So there's sort of there's definitely some sort of unit non-response depending on who's buying it. And a whole load of lack of other information. You'd imagine that me as a university lecturer expend very few calories, but if someone was a tree surgeon or something, they would expend lots of calories. So the occupation might be important, how much exercise you take. The fact that there's absolutely no pork products ever going in your basket, is that a result of a religious preference or is it a dietary preference? These sorts of things, and these are sorts of things that might all be important when studying nutrition, but actually the found data isn't particularly of a high quality in terms of getting behind some of this stuff. We've got lots of lessons. I'm going to try and come to a close. We've got lots of lessons from 100 years of social science data analysis. One of the ones I always like is this study here, where the individual has gone to 17 European countries and got an estimate of the number of breeding pairs of storks, and they plotted it alongside the birth rate per thousand, and we see that these countries with more storks have more babies, and there's a fairly strong correlation between the two. Exactly the sort of thing you might get if you left a machine to analyse this. I don't think there's anyone in the room who believes that there's a causal relationship between storks and birth rate. Is there? If there is, see us quietly afterwards, and we'll discuss it further. Yeah. But this is exactly the sort of thing that a very naive analysis of data with no sort of intellectual input, as it were. So one of the things I'm sort of coming to a close really is saying that there is a lot of data. There's an increasing amount of big data. The horizons of big data are expanding in the sort of known data universe. And we can maybe often make rapid and inexpensive, rapid and inexpensive novel forms of information about the contemporary world are becoming available to us. And these are the sort of things we could harvest, we could usefully marshal in terms of kind of analysing the contemporary economic and social world. And this could have a benefit, not just for social science analysis, but for organisations in business and industry. And really, for the rest of the day, we've got a series of more talks, but really one of the themes I want to home in on is what could the data-ready social science graduate of the 21st, I was going to keep saying the 21st century, but we're now 18 years into the 21st century. So what would we call this bit? It's not even millennial now, is it? It's much kind of... Anyway, this next portion of the 21st century, what should the data-ready social science graduate, what sort of skills and knowledge and abilities should they have? And we know quite a lot from inside the universities about social science knowledge, where we tend to improve people's computing ability over the decades, and we've certainly got to grips with giving people more statistical data analysis skills. But we really want to know much more about, what should the data-ready social science graduate have? What sort of business skills should they have? What sort of business ideas should they have? What sort of acumen? What sort of knowledge should they have? What sort of person is going to step out of universities after graduation day and into your organisations, and kind of, what sort of readiness should they have? What sort of skills should they bring with them? And what sort of abilities? What sort of transferable skills and so on? And that's really kind of where I'm going to come to a close, but thank you very much. I'll take a question if there's an immediate one, but am I conscious of time? Ben?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So